illustration tools. All right, so running pretty short on time, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Most of it's pretty straightforward. And if you've used Illustrator at all before, I'm sure you're familiar with these. There's a range of line and pen tools that you can use. When I added these in, these were animated GIFs, which looked a lot nicer, but anyway. So yeah, pen tools, curvature tools, line segment tools. Yeah, that's right. It doesn't add enough to it. So lots of tools for adding, for drawing lines. Lots of tools for 2D shapes. So you click on the rectangle tool. There's a range of different options that you can choose from. One thing that's worth noting is that when you're drawing a rectangle or an ellipse, if you hold down Shift while you draw it, instead of you'll draw a perfect square or a perfect circle. So holding Shift while you create the shape will give you a perfect square or circle. If you hold down Alt, so generally when you create the shape, if you click here, as you drag it, the shape will start here, and as you drag the cursor, the shape will follow the cursor. So you would have, clicking from here to here, you would have a rectangle filling that space. Sometimes you want to create the shape around a center point. So if you hold the Alt key down while you create the shape, you'll create the shape. As you click and drag, where you first click will be the center of your shape, and then as you drag the mouse out, you'll obviously be creating, changing the size of that shape. So the Shift key gives you perfect squares and circles. The Alt key allows you to create from the center instead of from side to side, and you can use them both together. There's a range of different selection tools. So the standard selection tool selects the entire object. The direct select tool allows you to select individual anchor points on an object, so you can change the shape of the objects. If you create a square or a circle, you can grab an individual anchor point and drag that out and change the shape of it. Magic Wand allows you to select similar objects with similar attributes. The Lasso tool allows you to sort of select a range of, freehand draw and select all the objects within that space. All right, you can edit your shapes and paths. So if you're editing stroke properties, you can modify the endpoints of the stroke. So does it have square ends, round ends? What do the corners look like? You can add dashes to the stroke. You can add arrowheads. These are all pretty straightforward, but this is under the stroke panel. You can add and edit anchor points. So this is an example of, probably a freehand shape. All these blue dots are anchor points. So if you use the direct select tool, you can add additional anchor points, and then using the anchor tool itself, you can click on individual anchor points and change the properties of that point. So you can grab the anchor point and move it around. This will change the shape. If you click on the individual anchor points, so some of them are essentially corner points, some of them are curvature points. You can click on a point and change whether it's a corner or a curvature. If it's a curve, you can change how much it's curving, so make it broader or narrower. You can join separate line tools together using the join tool. And sometimes, to create your complicated shapes, if you just sort of create a bunch of standard shapes to begin with, you can use things like the shape builder or Pathfinder to essentially merge those shapes together in a range of different ways to create unique shapes. So the Pathfinder is a tool panel that, depending on which option you choose here, whether you combine them, subtract them, divide, or whatever, you can take the same group of shapes and combine a range of different complex shapes based on those simple 2D shapes. You can transform. There's a bunch of simple transform tools: rotate, scale, reflect, and just free transform. So those are all pretty self-explanatory, do exactly what you would expect them to do. There's also a transform tool panel you can click on, and this will allow you to, specifically move your image around, change the scale. Depending on what object you pick, you'll get some different options here. So this is obviously based on a polygon. So you can change the number of sides for that polygon, change its rotation, sort of thing. There are also some more advanced transform tools. So the blend tool, probably not a whole lot of use for, but it is kind of cool. Essentially, this will morph the shapes and colors between two or more shapes. So if we clicked on this, so we click on the circle and the star and the orange, you essentially get you get this sort of blend both in shape and color from green to purple and then purple to orange. So it can create some interesting effects. The smooth tool would basically take something with nice sharp edges like this, and you simply would basically create sort of smooth curved edges for that shape. The warp tool is kind of handy. The warp tool, if you click on this, you could essentially free warp. So you could turn like a regular, something like this slice of pizza, click on the end of it and make it look like it's all melting off or something. So it allows you to sort of do these sort of freehand warping of your shapes. That'll be pretty cool. All right, so working with effects, there's a bunch of 2D effects that you can apply to your images. So yeah, these apply to shapes or paths. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll go through a couple. So this is under the effects menu. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of options there. One that I think is kind of useful is the zigzag tool. So that's under the distort and transform, the zigzag. And essentially what this allows you to do is if you take a straight line, you can create either a zigzag or, if you smooth it out, you can create a sine wave. So you can, edit the amplitude or the frequency of the sine wave. I think that's kind of a handy tool to use. Certainly a lot easier than trying to freehand a sine wave and get it nice and even. The transform effect. The transform effect, basically you can create multiple copies of your tool, of your shape, and then you can transform it so you can increase the scale of it. So let's say you want multiple concentric circles or something like that. You create one, and then you create multiple copies of it, and you increase the horizontal or vertical scale, and you'll have expanding or contracting concentric circles or squares or whatever. You can also have them move. So if you wanted to create that sort of 3D tunnel effect where they're sort of zooming off into the distance, fading out into the distance, and create that sort of effect. The GIF did demonstrate these nicely, but you can rotate them. So create some pretty interesting effects with that one. There's a lot of effects in it. We could spend hours going through all the effects and how to use them. Most of them you'll probably never use anyway. 3D effects. You can apply 3D effects in Illustrator. So there's a 3D materials tool panel, and this will allow you to create planar rotations, extrude the shapes, revolve them, so create a range of different three-dimensional structures. And again, you can flip them, rotate them, twist them, all sorts of cool designs, plate them. So you can apply material effects to it, so you can change the outside of the image to look, there's a range of different materials available. Change the to look like whatever you want, and apply different lighting effects to get to enhance that 3D appearance. We don't need to watch it again. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is under the effects and 3D materials. All right. So one thing that's worth noting is that effects are essentially raster objects. So, and they're essentially, they're effects that are applied as a transform to your original image. So this can be kind of handy. So, if you're applying some sort of effect to it, if you click on the object itself, you'll still have the original object. So whether that was a square or a circle or a straight line, you still have that original object. So that can be beneficial. It means that you can, if you change the shape of that original object, whatever effect you applied to that will be applied to the new, to the new shape that you've created. But it is worth noting that because they're raster effects, they are going to be affected by the resolution of your document. So some more so than others. This is a somewhat extreme example, but like say, for example, with drop shadow, with a low resolution document, your the effect's going to look very pixelated, whereas, at higher resolution, it's going to look a lot better. If you haven't set the resolution of your document to begin with, you can set the, under the effects menu, you can select the document raster effects setting. This is a bit speaking of being pixelated. But yeah, document effect raster settings, and you can change those to it. You may want to expand your objects, your effects. So as I said, the effects are applied as a transform. If you want to lock that effect in so it doesn't change moving forward, if you click on the object menu and then scroll down to expand appearance. So you'll go from something like this. So if you look at the red semicircle here, so this is a semicircle shape that has been, we've applied a 3D revolve transform to it. So, but the original shape that we click on is still that semicircle. Once we expand appearance, we essentially turn that into a vector graphic. And so now it's no longer a raster object, it's a vector graphic, but we can then no longer change the 3D effects or transforms to it. Working with gradients, gradients is a good way to apply an extra dimension to your images. You can apply linear gradients, radial gradients, or freehand custom gradients. You can set the colors. So you click on the little circles on either end here. You can choose what color the gradients are going to be. If you click in the middle here somewhere, you can add additional colors so you can have multiple gradients. You can change essentially the slope of the gradient, how steeply it shifts from one color to another. If you click on the edit tool, you can change the shape of the gradient itself. So essentially how that gradient is applied, how well it fits your shape. Rotate it. So, and then this is the freehand gradient tool. So you can add points wherever you want on your image, set the color of those points, and then, morph how the gradients interact with each other. Similar to, customized colors. Once you find a gradient, if you pick a gradient that you're going to be using a lot for various images, you can click and drag that gradient into the swatches panel and then apply that to future images. So you can use it over and over again. Patterns is another useful tool. So there is a pattern option menu you can select, and this will basically open up a panel that allows you to create a pattern. So this is a fairly simple one, just with some different color squares. But you can use this to determine how the pattern is going to be tiled out on the image. How the individual elements of the pattern will be sized or overlaid on each other. once you're happy with the pattern, if you click done, that pattern will be automatically applied, added to your swatches panel, so you can use it over and over again. Just going to click pause here. So something that's useful to note is that, so in this case, we've applied the pattern to a new shape. If I want that pattern, so if I want the pattern to be, larger or smaller within the shape, if I use my scale tool, you have the option, so you can apply the scale effects to, you can actually transform the object. So obviously that's going to make the object larger or smaller. But you can also choose to apply it specifically to the pattern within it. So you can scale independent elements of the object independently. So in this case, if we just scale the pattern, we can make the pattern larger or smaller without actually changing the size of our object. Patterns can also be applied to brush strokes. So got an example here. I'm going to create a lipid bilayer. This is pretty, so if we select our brush strokes and we click new brush stroke, we're going to apply a pattern brush to that. And so this is going to give us an error. So it'll come up with an error here. This error is basically telling us, so when we created this, the elements of the lipid bilayer, I've used a gradient. And it's going to tell us that what this is telling us that we can't use gradients in a brush stroke. So this is where you would go back to our original element. I'm going to ungroup everything and select the whole, select the element, or select everything, and then I'm going to click on expand. So this, as we did with our original effects, so we're expanding this, expanding the gradient out. We can specify the number of objects. So, the more objects you add, the closer you'll get to the original gradient. But essentially what this is going to do is, once we've expanded it out, is if we click on it now, we can see essentially we've got a whole bunch of vector elements. So rather than have the gradient, which is the raster effect, we have the element. So now we can apply that to the brush stroke. It's going to give us some options. How do we want the corners to look? You can try some different options depending on, what you're working with. So once we're happy, we click OK. And so now we can apply that brush stroke to different shapes. So initially the scale is going to be ridiculous, but if you change the thickness of it, so, I think I went down to like 0.25 stroke weight or 0.15 or something like that. There's a great, a very quick and easy way to, in this case, to create something like a lipid membrane. Oh, yeah, so we're going through it all again. All right, so tips and additional resources. So save your work regularly. I've made the mistake after spending hours, putting together some complex, signaling pathway. I need to have my computer crash and have to do the whole thing again. Honestly, I think that computer was lucky I didn't throw it out the window that night. But get used to using custom workspaces and libraries and layers. It may take a bit of getting used to using them, but these will save you a lot of time in your workflows. Check out the Adobe tutorials. So Adobe themselves have a lot of tutorials on how to use their software, but there's also great tutorials online. One example is, this YouTube channel. They have lots of examples on the types of images you can create in Illustrator, and not just showing you sort of how to do this, but essentially create an image like this in under half an hour. Despite so this is an example of the warp tool I was talking about before. So you watch this tutorial, all these cells were originally created from a single template. So create a single cell, make multiple copies of it, and then use the warp tool to sort of warp them all as a group, so you get, looks a little more realistic where, the cells are all unique shapes and sizes. So, went a little bit longer than we wanted to, but that's pretty much it. As I said, there's also LinkedIn. UQ staff and students have access to the LinkedIn libraries, and there's lots of courses on using Illustrator in LinkedIn. So